Today I'm going to provide a short Hebrew lesson about how a personal pronoun can be used to emphasize something in a sentence. And then we'll look at some scriptural examples. To learn more, join me for today's episode of All Things Apostolic. I'm going to cover a couple of short, simple grammatical concepts in Hebrew, and then we're going to look at scriptural examples to see how they impact the meaning of the sentences. The first concept is independent personal pronouns. A personal pronoun is like I, you, he, she, we, and they. A pronoun is used in place of a noun as the subject of the sentence, the one doing the action. For example, if I'm talking about Jim, the first time I refer to him, I would say his name. But then the next time I refer to him, I could use a pronoun he, and you would know who I'm referring to. Pronouns are independent when they can stand alone. They are not attached to any other words. Here is a chart that shows the list of Hebrew independent personal pronouns. These words are independent because they do not attach to other words. They can stand by themselves in a sentence. And the left column should look like the list of pronouns we are used to seeing in English. But Hebrew has a few more because it delineates between masculine and feminine and between singular and plural. Now, in English, a verb by itself does not have person, gender, or number. For example, if I say the word study, it doesn't tell you whether it's a first, second, or third person doing the action, whether it's a male or female, or whether it's one or many doing the action. But if I add a pronoun and adjust the verb accordingly to say, she studies, then you know that it is a third person, feminine, singular. The subject of the sentence, she, is in the third person, she's feminine, and there's only one of her. I now have a clear subject and a clear verb, two separate words. So in English, the subject of the verb and the verb itself are two separate words. But in Hebrew, the subject and the verb can be written as one word. Hebrew can use one word where English uses two. And because the subject is combined with the verb in Hebrew, the verb then shows person, gender, and number. We can identify the person, gender, and number based on certain patterns of inflection. Here's a chart that shows perfect verbs. Now, perfect verbs, it's just a fancy way of saying that they show completed action. So they're usually translated in the past tense. Notice that there is a three-letter root in black. The first form is 3NS, which means third masculine singular. The pronoun is translated as he. There is no ending on that form. This form doesn't have an ending. It's just what we call katal. The verb would be katal with no ending to it. And katal means he killed. But the rest of the examples show a different inflectional ending, or what we would call a sopformative, and it's shown in red. Remember to read with me from right to left. The red ending or sopformative is added to the end of the verbal root to indicate the person, gender, and number. So if I want to say she killed, I would add an ah sound at the end of the verb katal, and I would say katala. If I want to say that I killed, I would add a t sound to the end of the word katal, the verb, and say katalti. So the sopformative is added to the end of the root verb to identify the person, gender, and number. You don't have to understand all of the details of the chart. But just recognize that the pronoun is built into the finished word by being attached as a sufformative to the end of the verb. Okay, you're doing great so far. Now, these are all examples in which the pronoun is attached to the end of the verb or the root. But sometimes the pronoun is at the beginning of the verb or at both ends of the verb. So here is a chart that shows a model for what we call an imperfect verb. It denotes incomplete action. So often these types of verbs are translated in the future tense. The main thing to pay attention to is the part in red. For each word, note that there is still a 3-letter root in black. In this case, it's shown as blank boxes. And reading right to left, instead of there being a sufformative at the end of the verbal root, there is a preformative at the beginning of the root. So looking at the first line, if I want to say, I will keep, I will add an aleph in front of the 3-letter root, shamar, and I get eshmor. If I want to say, we will keep, I will add a nun preformative before the root and get nishmor. If I want to say, you will keep, and I'm talking to a group of guys, so it's second person you, it's masculine because it's guys and it's plural because there's more than one. I would add a tet sound at the beginning and an oo sound at the end and get tishmuru. The main point to grasp from all of this is that Hebrew verbs have performatives at the beginning of verbs or sufformatives at the end of verbs, and sometimes at both ends of a verb. And these pronouns are inseparable from the verb, and they indicate the person, gender, and number of the one doing the action. So let's look briefly at a chart that shows examples with both sufformatives and preformatives. The left column has sufformatives at the end of the verb, and the right column has preformatives at the beginning of the verb or on both sides of the verb. The important thing to notice is that the pronoun is already embedded in the word, so we don't have to have an independent personal pronoun like we do in English. Okay, the grammar lesson is over at this point, and you have survived very well. Now, hopefully, comes the fun part. Let's look at some examples from the Bible and talk about why this is important. Let's look at the first part of Genesis 28:15. With a very literal translation, the text says, "And behold, I with you," or "I am with you." The verb am is not actually in the sentence. It is implied. So this is what we would call a verbless clause. It doesn't actually have a verb. The verb is implied. There's not an actual verb. This clause uses the independent personal pronoun because there isn't a verb to attach to. The pronoun is Anohi, which means I. So this says, "And behold, I am with you." And I is an independent, standalone pronoun. If we continue reading the verse, and I'm doing a very literary wooden translation, it says, "And I will keep you in all that," or wherever you will go. Now, the first word has a lot going on. It has the conjunction "and" at the beginning, followed by the 3-letter verbal root. That is followed by the sufformative for the pronoun I, which I've marked in red. And then last, there is the object you. So this is an example of the pronoun being embedded as a sufformative after the verbal root. The last word of this phrase has a preformative you at the beginning of the verb. So the word says, "You will go." So as you can see in this part of the verse, we have two pronouns, one used as a sufformative and one used as a preformative. So no independent pronouns were used. And this is pretty typical for Hebrew. The pronouns were embedded with the verbs rather than being independent words. When the pronouns are attached as preformatives and subformatives, then you don't need independent pronouns. Okay, I appreciate you staying with me so far. I hope it's clear because now that you've got these concepts down, I want to show you an important exception. When a biblical writer wanted to emphasize the subject of a sentence, he would place an independent personal pronoun just before the verb, even though the verb had a pronoun attached. We know that the independent pronoun isn't necessary when the verb already has a preformative or subformative pronoun attached. So why include the independent pronoun when it isn't necessary? For emphasis. Writers did this to emphasize the subject's involvement in the action of the verb. The repetition provides emphasis. Let's look at a couple of examples. The first one comes from Exodus chapter 3, which is the story of God commissioning Moses. Of course, as we know, Moses questioned God and asked, "Who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" In Exodus 3:12, God responded, "And he said, Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain." Now, this sounds like a pretty good reassurance, but it's actually stronger than we realize, and we can see this when we look at the Hebrew. It reads from right to left, "And this to you a sign that I have sent you." In the fifth box, notice the independent personal pronoun I, Anohi, followed by the verb with the subformative I. The first pronoun is unnecessary grammatically, and in fact the King James didn't translate it. The King James Version, it's not translated. And sometimes when there's repetition like that, the translators won't even include it. Like a repetition emphasizes the subject's involvement in the verb. God was saying to Moses, I have sent you, or I myself have sent you. So we can reread this verse with the Hebrew emphasis added in. And he said, "Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee, that I myself have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain." God was clearly emphasizing that I myself and no one else has sent you. In fact, there is a lot of this use of emphasis in the interplay between God and Moses, especially in Exodus chapter 4. I'll share a little with you with the emphatic pronouns from the Hebrew added in to the King James Version, so you can see what it sounds like if all of the emphases are made obvious. So I'll read verses 10 through 16. And I've highlighted in red where the emphasis is with the independent personal pronoun added that isn't included in the King James Version. "And Moses said unto the Lord, O Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I myself will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he himself can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. And thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth. And I myself will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. And he himself shall be thy spokesman unto the people. And he shall be, even he shall be. Now here the King James reflects the repetition. To thee instead of a mouth, and thou thyself shalt be to him instead of God. Notice how God used emphasis or multiple emphases in places to make counter arguments against Moses. Our last example for today comes from Leviticus 17:11. It reads, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul." Now, this is a good translation, but in English we lose something in the translation. God tells us that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and he has given it upon the altar to make atonement. But let's look at the Hebrew more closely. The clause begins with a conjunction and, followed by the independent personal pronoun ani, which means I. Next is the verb to give with the sufformative I, and then the suffix it. So the one word means I have given it. The last word means to you. So notice that the independent personal pronoun has been placed just before the verb. It isn't needed, but the writer wanted to emphasize the subject's involvement in the action of the verb. The clause would literally say, and I have given it to you. But it's more proper to say, I myself have given it to you. This is a beautifully clear theology of sacrifice. God is saying that the life of the flesh is in the blood, so blood is needed to make atonement. Then he emphasizes that he himself is the one who provides the means for atonement in the first place. So think about this. We usually consider sacrifice something that we give to God, but it is God who has given it to us. Romans 8 tells us that God demonstrated his love for us by Christ dying for us when we were still sinners. God is the one who has provided sinners with the way to attain forgiveness. And this verse has the independent personal pronoun included to emphasize that it is God who has done this work. I hope you have enjoyed learning a little Hebrew grammar with me today and seeing how there is so much richness to be found in the Word of God. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of All Things Apostolic. And until next time, take care and God bless.